Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar for the Measure AA 2020 grant funding. My name is Jessica Davenport, and I'll be giving an overview of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority's 2020 grant round, as well as our new community grants program. So I'm pleased to see so many of you here attending. Linda Tong couldn't make it today, so Maggie Jenkins, our Sea Grant Fellow, will be filling in and helping out with technical issues. As I'm presenting, feel free to enter questions into the Q&A at any time. And if you've joined by phone, you can press *9 and wait to be called to ask your question at the end of the presentation. If you have any issues you can't get through, you can email Maggie. She's going to put her email address in the chat. Have you done that, Maggie?
I'm just about to.
Okay, great. All right. So, launching right in. Oh, first I'd like to do a poll just to see who's with us today in terms of what organization do you represent. So feel free to fill that out. Great, looks like we have a mix of different kinds of organizations here. I will let people fill that out for another couple seconds. And go right ahead with our slides. So what is the authority? It's a regional agency created to fund shoreline projects that will protect, restore, and enhance San Francisco Bay. Measure AA, which was passed in June of 2016, generates the funds to accomplish the Restoration Authority's mission. It's a $12 a year parcel tax that generates $500 million over 20 years for restoration around SF Bay. And complete restoration is estimated to cost over $2 billion. So these funds will help leverage state and federal funds. The jurisdiction is the shoreline of the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, excluding the Delta primary zone. So I'm going to share the results of the poll. And we have the greatest number is local agencies at 34%. You can all see the rest, pretty even among the other categories of federal, state, nonprofit, local, and nonprofit community-based, as well as we have a few business and private landowners and others. So that's great. Thank you for sharing what kind of organization you're from. So moving on to our next slide. The Restoration Authority can fund habitat projects that will restore, protect, or enhance tidal wetlands, managed ponds, or natural habitats along the shoreline, flood management features that are part of such a habitat project, or public access or recreational amenities that are part of such a habitat project. And this is based on the requirements of the Restoration Authority Act of 2008, as well as Measure AA. So sometimes people ask, where is along the shoreline? So we have defined that in the guidance that's provided in the request for proposals. And it includes the subtidal habitats lying below mean low tide within reasonable distance of the shoreline, the baylands between the high and low tides, as well as areas that would be covered by the tides in the absence of levees or other unnatural structures, and the portions of creeks or rivers located below the head of tide. And then also we include transition zones, which are the uplands adjacent to potential or actual tidal wetlands that can provide transitional habitat or marsh migration space, which is areas that are needed to enhance the project's resilience to sea level rise. The eligible grantees list is pretty extensive. Eligible applicants include federal, state, and local agencies, tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and owners and operators of shoreline parcels. And the locations are, as I mentioned, shoreline areas. And then for more specifics about this, you can look at the map of the Delta primary zone in the request for proposals on our grants website. Similarly, there's quite a broad number of project phases that are eligible. Many different phases, including acquisition of property that's going to lead to habitat restoration, protection, or enhancement, the planning and design stages, permitting, construction, implementation, monitoring, and maintenance. But regardless of what phase the project is in, it's very important to think about how to engage the surrounding communities for a more robust project. And for example, think about what local organizations you can partner with to combine a strong habitat restoration proposal with a strong community engagement effort, especially in economically disadvantaged communities. And we have a tip sheet on meaningful community engagement from the State Coastal Conservancy linked here and in our application materials. And this PowerPoint will be posted to the website with the links after this presentation. And we are recording it, and we'll be tracking all the questions and answers and providing a summary of those as well. So the Measure AA eligibility criteria have to do with these 4 program areas. So all project proposals have to meet both the enabling legislation, that's the Restoration Authority Act, as well as Measure AA. So all proposals must protect, restore, enhance habitat, and meet at least one of Measure A's 4 main programs. And the first is the Safe, Clean Water and Pollution Prevention Program, where specific activities are eligible, such as reducing pollution and engaging in restoration activities, shoreline cleanup and trash removal, and restoring wetlands and creeks. And again, projects would need to meet the Restoration Authority Act and Measure AA. For example, a shoreline cleanup proposal would also need to make the case that it will protect, enhance, or restore habitat. The second Measure AA program is vital fish, bird, and wildlife habitat. And specific activities that are eligible include protecting and restoring wetlands and other shoreline habitats to benefit shorebirds, waterfowl, and fish, and providing stewardship, maintenance, and monitoring of restoration projects. The third program area is natural flood protection. Specific activities that are eligible would include providing nature-based flood protection through wetland and habitat restoration, and building or improving flood protection levees that are a necessary part of wetland restoration activities. The fourth Measure AA program is Shoreline Public Access. Specific activities that are eligible include constructing and managing public access trails and related facilities, and providing interpretive materials and outreach events to protect the bay's health and encourage community engagement. We'll now review some specifics for the competitive grant round. So as you can see from this slide, in both cases, we strongly encourage you to submit a pre-application And that will enable us to sit down with you and have a conversation about your project prior to filling out a full application. And if you are applying for a competitive grant, you would eventually submit a full application, which would be reviewed by staff and members of the advisory committee who do not have a conflict of interest. And then those top ranked projects would be recommended for funding, recommended to our board for funding. So at the same time, we have a rolling process for community grants, but we'll discuss that later. So first, the competitive grant round. This, as you can see, is our schedule. We have opened up the application period. We're having our, oops, that should say August 19th, not October, sorry about that, webinar today. And we'll be awarding, starting in the spring, as our board approves projects that are recommended. And there'll be about 12 million available. And there's much more information about this on our website on the grants page. Measure AA has several prioritization criteria. So we are directed to give priority to projects that will have the greatest positive impact on San Francisco Bay, the greatest long-term impact. So that can address things like the resilience of the project to sea level rise. Geographic distribution is something that we track every year to see how we're doing toward our targets. And we look at leveraging state and federal dollars as well as public and private partnerships. There is no required match for our projects, but it's something that can help your project if you have it. We're looking for projects that benefit economically disadvantaged communities, benefit the region's economy, engage youth and young adults, incorporate monitoring, maintenance, and stewardship, and meet the selection criteria of the State Coastal Conservancy, the San Francisco Bay Conservation Development Commission, and the San Francisco Bay Joint Venture. So the reviewers of applications will be looking at these, and they'll be doing qualitative evaluation in addition to quantitative. And the qualitative will really look at the top three strengths and 3 weaknesses of your project. And we do provide that feedback to people afterward if they're interested. So another area that the reviewers will be looking at is the project's likelihood of success. And this is based on the applicant's capacity and resources to complete and maintain the project based on their history, looking at the budget and schedule to see if it's reasonable and well thought out, the leveraging of resources and partnerships, and the inclusion of monitoring, maintenance, and stewardship. And we'll also be looking at the project's level community involvements and benefits and or innovative partnerships. And that can be demonstrated by having support letters from project partners, some description of community support, involvement, and the benefits that this project will provide to the community, and particularly the benefits to economically disadvantaged communities. And again, you can find more information about this in the request for proposals. So we have a few tips on filling out your grant application. Remember to carefully review the eligibility criteria and the priority criteria, and as well as how to demonstrate your project's likelihood of success. So as I mentioned, we strongly encourage pre-applications and setting up a consultation with staff to discuss your project. And when you do submit the application packet, there are PDF cover pages an application questions section that you can fill out in Word, and an Excel budget template. So people often ask, is there a maximum or a minimum grant award? And the answer is no. And you can also, if you want to get a sense of the wide range of dollar amount of projects that we have funded, you can look on our website. There's a current projects page, and all our funded projects are listed there, and you can get a sense of what people have been awarded for different types of projects, from planning to design and implementation. So we will fund pilot projects. There is no matching requirement, but leveraging is good. And you won't necessarily receive more points for addressing more programs and activities of Measure AA. The projects will be assessed based on that, but also how well the project addresses these programs and activities. So it could do one really, really well and still score very highly. So there's no need to try to stretch your project to address a program that it doesn't address in any really meaningful way, because you can still score well even if you're only addressing one or two. So again, you can see our grants page for more information. Now we're going to move to talking about our new community grants program. So as I mentioned, this is a rolling program. It's in the pilot phase. It's the first year that we're doing it. And you can fill out a pre-application at any time. Again, sorry about the date being wrong about the webinar. That is today, August 19th. And for this one, there is a maximum award of $100,000, and we do have an allocation in our annual budget of $200K for the program. So this community grants program grew out of a couple of years of work with a consultant and our advisory committee, and it was recommended that we have a separate application pathway to support projects led by community-based organizations in economically disadvantaged communities. And I want to emphasize here that community-based organizations are still very welcome to apply to the competitive grant round if they want to and have the capacity to do that. However, community-based organizations may also want to apply for a community grant if they are partnering with another organization, but they want to be in charge of their own funding for the community engagement portion. In any case, the applications will be accepted on a rolling basis, and the pre-application will ask for basic information about the project, schedule, budget, and partners. We've created some fictional examples of pre-applications to give you an idea of the kind of information that we're looking for. And once we have selected a pre-application of an organization to develop into a full project, the staff will work directly with the applicant, and they will not need to fill out a full application, but we will work toward a staff recommendation together that addresses all those issues. Oh, did I go backwards? Here we go. So the kinds of projects that we're looking for the community grants program include community visioning led by community-based organizations in economically disadvantaged communities, or EDCs, training for EDC leaders to develop, apply for, and implement small shoreline habitat projects, supporting community-based organizations and EDCs in gaining knowledge of shoreline issues and building relationships with government agencies and nonprofits so that they can participate in a shoreline habitat project in the future with more capacity and knowledge, and implementing shoreline habitat projects with strong community benefits. So some examples of recently funded projects are here. One is the Herons Head Park Shoreline Resilience Project on the southern shoreline of San Francisco. That was close to $300,000 to the Port of San Francisco, and they will be working with other partners, including Literacy for Environmental Justice and a scientific organization to hire and train local young adults and to be trained in bay ecology and hands-on conservation, such as native plant propagation, revegetation, and invasive plant control. And the Lower Walnut Creek Restoration Project, closer to $8 million to Contra Costa County for implementation, and it will restore creekside wetland habitats by breaching levees to reintroduce the tides to diked former baylands. And again, you can look at the example pre-applications on our website to get a sense of what different projects, what we're looking for in these projects. So thank you, and we'll take your questions now. If you have not yet, please type them into the Q&A, and we will answer them. If we're not able to answer them today, we will take a note of them and provide them in an FAQ, frequently asked questions, afterward. And we do have additional information on our website. So I'm just going to leave the slideshow here in case we need to refer to any slides. Okay, so we do have a few questions here. There's a question about a specific location. I am not going to answer specific location questions now, but feel free to email us at grants@sfarestore.gov for specific location questions. And then as far as our next question is whether it's okay to submit more than one pre-proposal or pre-application, and yes, it is. We have a question of, can we use Measure AA funds to relocate utilities as part of a wetland restoration project? I think that would depend on the situation. It seems possible, but I think we would want to look at that on a case-by-case basis. That can definitely be a very expensive aspect of a project, so we would need to look carefully at that issue. We have another question. If a project receives a grant for planning, does that preclude the project from applying for construction funding in later years? No, it does not. In fact, it's quite fine to do planning and then discuss when you apply for construction funding how your planning is serving that construction phase. And especially be important to talk about the community engagement during the planning process. That would be helpful. What is the turnaround time to get staff input on the pre-application? We will be responding to your submissions right away and scheduling a time as soon as we can. We as staff prioritize these consultations, and in the past, we've been able to schedule them usually within a week. It looks like we may have more people requesting them this year, so can't guarantee that, but we will definitely work with you to schedule it as soon as possible. There's a question about creeks, projects for creeks that lead into the bay and how far up the creek is eligible. And that would be described in our RFP. It discusses that the portion of the creek below the head of tide is eligible. And we have a question whether there will be a consultation set up prior to the pre-proposal being submitted or after. And the answer is after. We use the pre-application to guide our conversation with you. So that way we can spend less time asking you basic questions about the project and more time discussing how it can be a good fit for the Measure AA program. Let's see. There's a question, would restoring an extirpated species to the shoreline, such as burrowing owls, meet the criteria? I think we would have to discuss that. I don't have, it hasn't come up yet for us, so happy to discuss that in a case-by-case basis for a specific project. Oh, the email address, Maggie can type in the email address for you. It's grants@sfbayrestore.org. Sorry, I think I said it wrong. But we can provide that to you. It's also on the website, on the grants page. If awarded, what is the performance period time frame, if there is one? I think that means the time that the project would need to continue to be maintained, and that is generally 20 years. For construction, we would like to see that it's maintained as a restoration project. And how do the limitations of shelter in place because of the pandemic factor into projects whose mission is to engage communities? That's a great question. I think we've been learning a lot about alternative ways to engage communities during shelter in place, and there are some online measures, there are other measures, creative measures that people are using, and I think that will be something that we'll need to do more research on and maybe help provide resources to grantees so that they can learn more about that as well. But I think that's something we're all learning about, and it would be great to share information. So our community grants, subject to the same zone requirements, needs to be on bay to transition zone. Yes, the idea of the community grants is to involve the community in shoreline habitat projects. So it would be the same zone, although the actual activities, such as if there are educational efforts that happen on Zoom, obviously it wouldn't be happening in that zone, but the eventual goal of the community grants program is to be under the scope as legally defined for this program. And would the restoration features of a larger multi-objective project be eligible? That's something we would need to look at on a case-by-case basis. This is a program primarily for restoration. At the same time, we do support multi-benefit projects. However, some of the projects that are primarily focused on other objectives and have restoration as only a smaller component may not be eligible. I think that's something we would want to definitely discuss on a case-by-case basis. Let's see. Okay, this question says, the overpass and street to get to the shoreline or creek is not a pleasant experience. Is a cross focus on transportation planning allowed to address lack of access to the shoreline, as well as program events at the shoreline creek that reflect the culture of the community and include education around the shoreline? With regard to the transportation planning, I think that's also something that we haven't dealt with yet. I wouldn't completely rule it out. So it could be something that's considered, but it would have to link to a specific restoration project, I think, to be eligible. And program events at the shoreline that reflect the cultural culture of the community and education. That's definitely something that could be part of a community grants program. Again, it would need to have an eventual linkage to a shoreline project. So it could be community events that are educating people about opportunities for restoration on the shoreline or ongoing restoration on the shoreline. Is there a time frame for when grant funds need to be expended, meaning from when we receive an executed grant agreement, do funds need to be spent within X years? There's not a legal limit in the same way that state funds sometimes have expiration dates, like state bond funds. We don't have that with Measure AA because it's a parcel tax. However, we have a lot of oversight of this program by our oversight committee, as well as our board, and they want to see that funds are spent promptly. Otherwise, they could be going to another project, providing benefits more quickly. So we do encourage people to apply when they are ready, and they know that they can move forward quickly with their project. And one of the criteria to look at is the urgency of the project. So if you don't think you're going to be able to spend the money very quickly, then it's probably better to wait until you're going to be ready to do that. And we do have multi-year projects, however, so it's not that everything has to be spent at once, but we're encouraging multi-year to be in the 3 to 5 year range as far as expending the funds. And each individual contract, the grant agreement, will have a date by which it needs to be completed and the funds spent. And so that's worked out with your project manager. I've been asked, can you discuss the budget in a bit more detail than what is on the template? Specifically, eligible costs, salary, travel, contracts for services, material and equipment, contingency plans, indirect costs. We do have some helpful guidance on that on our website under grants, resources for grantees. There are some budget guidelines that you can take a look at there. If you have trouble finding that, you can email us. And the next question, can you define head of tide for the creek zone limit? And is that current or considering sea level rise? We do discuss this in the RFP, and it does include, similar to the Balance, definition of including migration space and transition zones, similarly with the creek, if the project is going to account for head of tide migrating with sea level rise. that can be considered as an eligible area. Okay, our projects that have additional partners, for example, 2 nonprofit partners or a nonprofit and a government agency, given greater weight and have a better chance of being funded. I would say that's very much a case-by-case basis. We do like to see that a project that is done by an agency that doesn't have any local connections involves a partner that can help with the community engagement. So that could be an example where it would help, but it's certainly not an absolute thing that you would do better with partners. It really depends on the project and what partners are needed to make it successful. Okay, I am not seeing any more questions at the moment. I'll wait a few more minutes to see if anyone else has any questions. Okay, well, not seeing any questions. Maggie, did you get a chance to type in our grants email address?
Yes, I did type it in the chat.
Oh, okay, great. Just want to make sure everybody got that. And maybe paste in our grants page, a link to that. Although we do have that here on the PowerPoint. That's definitely the best place to start to get information. Well, these were really great questions, and I really appreciate your part. Oh, we got a couple more. All right. We have a question. In order to award as many projects that meet the scoring criteria, will SFBRA counter on the award amount? I think this is trying to get at the question of, is it possible for what you apply for in terms of funding amount to be different from what you're awarded? And yes, we do at times offer a lower amount. If there are elements within the budget that don't seem to be a good fit for the program, we may offer to fund the project without those components that aren't a good fit, for example, and then the budget would be less. Or sometimes during the course of the application process, the applicant might let us know that they got additional funding from another source, and therefore they don't need as much from us. And then we could propose a lower amount in that case. And okay, got some thank yous, so thank you all. And okay, I guess I'll wait one more minute just to see if there are any final questions. Oh, I guess people are probably, oh, not quite yet. We have a final poll, which is, let's see if I can pull it up. We wanted to find out who might be interested in the matching and having matching workshops, but I'm not seeing, oh, here's poll number 2. Here we go. So I'm gonna launch that. So this was an idea that came out of our discussions with community leaders and our consultants work and the advisory committee, that it would be great to match up some community-based organizations with some of the larger agencies that are engaged in restoration. And so we're looking at creating some workshops, maybe with some breakout sessions by region to help people meet each other in this era where it's hard to get together in person, but at least you could meet online and talk to each other. And it looks like we have a good number of people who are interested. There's still voting going on, but we have 61% yes and 35% maybe. So I guess if you have comments about what kind of matching workshop would be useful for you, feel free to type those into the Q&A. If you'd like to state if you have ideas about how you could be matched up or what would be a good format for this, we're definitely open. We haven't done this before, so we're open to your ideas. And yeah, so okay, we have 74% voted, so that's probably a good. Oh, people are still voting. But anyway, it looks like we do have a lot of interest in this. Oh, we got another couple questions. Will the Restoration Authority fund projects in upper watersheds that drain to the bay that benefit baylands, even though they're located in the upper watersheds? No, the Restoration Authority is restricted to funding projects along the shoreline. We do understand that watersheds are connected and they have an impact, and it's very important. And there are many other excellent grant programs that address those areas. So we hope that you can find resources for that. And we can help to direct you if you're having trouble finding grant programs that address those areas. Is there a geophysicist area of focus for this round? I think that probably is a typo. Maybe the question was meant to be, oh yes, it's corrected below, a geographic area that's a focus. No, we do not have a geographic focus for this round. So the next deadline for applications, let me go to that. Okay, is October 23rd, 2020, this year. So that is the final deadline to submit a full application. And it is optional to submit the pre-application and have the consultation, but it is highly recommended. So we're calling October 2nd the end of the pre-application because in the past we've gotten people right up to the end wanting to have consultations, and we feel that it's much more effective for you and for us if we can have a little more time to read your pre-application and have an educated discussion with you when there's still a little more time to work on the final application. So yes, but the final deadline is October 23rd. Okay. Can you describe the difference between the community grant program and the regular grant round? Why one would apply to one or another? Sure. So the competitive grant round is what we've been doing since Measure AA was passed and this program was created. It's more of a traditional approach where you have an opportunity to submit a full application describing your project in great detail and having a lot of backup for that. And then you're competing with others through this program, and there's a scoring, as you know, as I mentioned, quantitative as well as qualitative. Now the community grants program is new and different, and it really is intended to address the need for equity. We heard from community leaders that it's hard to compete with these large established organizations in the competitive grant round. And so we wanted to have an opportunity for this alternative pathway. And so if you are a community-based organization located in an economically disadvantaged community, you may want to consider applying to the community grants program. It doesn't hurt to fill out a pre-application in either case if you're unsure, because as I said, community-based organizations are still welcome to compete in the competitive grant round. But this gives us an opportunity to learn about all the community-based organizations in economically disadvantaged communities that are interested in getting more involved in shoreline habitat restoration. And one of the things we learned through the community focus groups was that there are community-based organizations that may not have experience to date in a habitat project, but they have extensive experience in community engagement. And they may have experience with other technical subjects like public health or flood protection. So we want to give that opportunity to groups that want to get more engaged with the shoreline restoration to develop skills, build relationships, learn more about what the issues are on the shoreline, so that when big habitat projects are happening, they're able to engage in a way that can really represent the community's interests and make sure that the projects are providing community benefits that are wanted and needed by those communities. Let me see, we got a couple more while I was talking. So there was a question, want to make sure the zone criteria applies to the community grants program as well. And yes, it's a little more flexible in the sense that the community grants program could be for community visioning that it does not yet have a specific location on the shoreline, but it must be aimed toward eventually developing a vision for projects on the shoreline. Let's see. And okay, there's a comment, not a question, about a possible partnership with state Fish and Wildlife now and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife for wildlife reintroductions. How can we learn about community focus groups? Well, community focus groups were conducted by our consultant, and the consultant's report is posted on our website with the board meeting materials for the board meeting where it was presented. I think we probably should also make it more accessible in another location on our website, but we can direct you to that afterward. And oh, there's a request for the link to the tip sheet for engaging communities. And Maggie, could you put that in the chat, or have you already?
I will go ahead and do that.
Okay, thanks. All right. And there's a question, oh, our project would be in the eligible zone were there not a tide gate downstream. I think, I would like to discuss that with the specifics of the project in front of me. I would say there's a possibility that it could be eligible because the baylands are defined as the areas that would be subject to title action if unnatural barriers were not there, and a tide gate, certainly an unnatural barrier. You know, we'd be happy to talk that through with you. And one thing to note about the pre-application is we don't want this to be a barrier to having discussions with you. If you feel that you can't fill out every aspect of the pre-application, you can just fill out what you can and submit it to us. It's not gonna adversely affect your chances, because we do want to use it to start a conversation. So if you're unsure whether you're going to be eligible, we would still encourage you to just very briefly fill out the pre-application, describe your project, maybe provide a link to a map showing where it is or something like that. Okay, we have the final votes from our poll. We have enough. So yeah, we have a good number of people who are yes or maybe. About almost 2/3 yes. So that's great. We will work on setting that up. And oh, someone else posted the tip sheet link. Thank you, in the Q&A. And all right, we're getting close to the end of our time. So I think I will wrap it up. Oh, let me share the results from the poll. Here we go. And Maggie, was there anything that needed to be clarified, do you think, in the questions, or are we good on having captured them?
Yeah, I think that we're good to go. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining this. And we look forward to learning more about your projects as we move forward.